Nexus, Book 1, by Leah Solmaz. If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. Gospel of Thomas, Gnostic Gospels. Chapter 1.
Please, you don't have to do this.
Daylight was almost spent as the billowing fog arrived and took Bedlam hostage. Not only was the city dizzy from the rat race week, but now it had the premise of another hapless face of nature to contend with, the fog.
Fight him. Do not let his serpent tongue poison your heart.
Kill him. Flashes of blue lightning accompanied the menacing cloud. It swept through the grey buildings and neon lights of Bedlam and held an eerie tone to it. It cocooned the city in a thick, whispering haze that saw the constant humdrum of traffic become a dulled buzz. The residents retreated to the safety of their homes, not daring to venture out into the unknown. They were accustomed to the comfort of the concrete labyrinth that surrounded them. Whenever Mother Nature would sweep in for a lively visit, the easy living city of Bedlam would be thrown into chaos. The temperatures that summer had risen to unseen heights, which had produced an increase in tropical storms. These violent storms would charge in and relentlessly rage. They'd erupt and dance fiercely for a couple of hours before disappearing in an uncharted fashion.
It's not too late. Please.
The pressure, suffocating and weighty, pulsed through the air as the night began her ritual. It spoke of something more than just the erratic temperament of weather, something more than nature, unnatural, perhaps something completely and wholly supernatural.
No!
A gut-wrenching scream rose like a spiralling whirlwind through the air, bellowing through the stone blocks of St. Dymphna's church.
What?
A quickened breath echoed throughout the chilled and empty church, and there on the fuchsia carpet beneath the altar sat the panic-stricken tattooist. Dax blinked furiously through the dark before crawling back, like some feral animal escaping a threat. He cowered at the sight before him. Never in his life had he seen anything as nauseating or as horrifying as that which lay barely a foot away from his black, weathered boot. Father Flanagan's face, pale and petrified, stared up to the shadows that blanketed the arched ceiling of St. Dymphna's. A thick, wine-coloured string of blood dangled and dripped from his mouth.
Oh, God!
Dax whispered. Dax Miller had lived in the Boroughs all of his life. It was a district of Bedlam that became the punchline of any wealthy bureaucrat's joke. The Boroughs had produced a number of unwarranted stories over the years. Beat-up hookers and scabby, sore-ridden junkies were seen as the norm on the streets, so much so that Dax had become accustomed to the brutal face of the district from an early age. At the hands of his own junkie mother, Jan, he had seen certain things that were less than age-appropriate. Even in Dax's line of work, he had dealt with some stomach-churning sights firsthand. A few of his clients were bleeders. Their thin skin tore all too easily under the needle's unforgiving point. Some clients were fainters, and others were pukers. The pukers were usually male tattoo virgins. They would brashly burst into the store, chests puffed out, noses in the air, and gruffly demand some monstrous tattoo that they'd decided on over breakfast. When it came to the crunch, That's when their machismo was really put to the test, and 9 times out of 10, they would share their breakfast with the floor. These particular clients were so reliable in their failures that Dax and his business partner Abel would often place bets on how long a customer would last before the pain and experience became too much for their weakened stomachs to handle. It was safe to say Dax had a stronger tolerance than most, but this distressing, unparalleled scene before him, however, tore through those limits. His eyes widened as his gaze fell to the catalyst of this unearthly vision. The dead priest's chest was splayed inside out. Organs and bones, crushed and broken, were covered in a slime-like matter of blood and fatty pus. What was once the godly man's intestines appeared to have been clawed out, squashed into eminent pulp. Bile bubbled up in the back of Dax's throat, and he grabbed his mouth in reflex. His breath caught as the undeniable smell of iron filled his nose. His hands shook as he pulled them away from his mouth, and he saw the darkened stains. Dried blood marred every crease of his fingers and palms. His titanium cotton t-shirt was also covered, like some abstract painting where the artist had flicked his paintbrush with an aimless cause. Instead of an expansive colour wheel, however, there were only varying shades of red and pink. Pea-size, slimy matter dangled from the cotton fibres. Remnants of some part of the priest's organs? A violent wave of nausea crashed over Dax, and he vomited. A lone snap sailed through the chilled air, followed by another. Dax jerked as his gaze found the source of the applause. The clapping figure strolled down the aisle and homed in on the shaken tattooist. Perfectly formed white teeth glistened in the dark. Long, platinum-grey hair flowed over broad shoulders and fell upon an ashy trench coat. His facial features held an unorthodox lure to them, handsome, yet unnerving. He looked like a man, but there was something more to his presence. Dax could sense it. The applause came to an abrupt, echoing stop. The stranger stepped onto the altar, stooped down to Dax's level, and the pair stared at each other. One set of eyes wide and teary, the other cold and steely. "You've done well." The stranger's voice held a gravelly, commanding tone to it. It was almost familiar. Dax found strength in his shaky state and stumbled to his feet. He was in no state to fight, and he didn't trust his knees to keep from buckling if he suddenly needed to take flight. All he could do was watch as the ominous man calmly rose to match the tattooist's height. Dax flinched as the man took a step forward. "And by some unknown stroke of luck, you managed to bring her here. I have to say, I'm rather impressed with his choice. You may actually have it in you to open the gate." The stranger spoke with patronizing commendation. Dax followed the man's eyeline. A gasp escaped the tattooist's mouth on seeing another body strewn a few feet away. Brianna Lane. Her skin still held colour to it in contrast to the pale, dead priest between them. Dax couldn't see any signs of breathing, however. Had Dax killed her too? As if by scripted cue, the unkissed sleeping beauty coughed herself into cognition, and her eyelids fluttered before slowly rolling open. Long, burgundy hair spilled forth like stage curtains as Brianna pushed against the cold carpet. Dax turned his attention from the woman back to his male companion. The man smirked menacingly as his chin dipped towards the redhead. With an unquestioning will, Dax rallied to Brianna's side.
"No! Get away! Where am I?"
Brianna became frantic under the weight of the tattooist's frame. Dax wrapped his trembling arms around her shoulders and tried to lift her up.
"We have to get out of here,"
Dax sobbed.
"What do you mean? Who? Where?"
Brianna's eyes searched the Gothic architecture, looking for the answers to her ignored questions. Her head snapped in the direction of Father Flanagan's decimated corpse. A spine-chilling scream ripped up through her lungs, and instinctively she fell into Dax's protective embrace. She clung desperately to his shirt. It felt papery to the touch. Something wasn't right. Dax tried desperately to get Brianna to her feet, but her body stilled. Dark stains covered his callous hands. Fear swelled in her chest.
"No, no, get off me!"
Brianna fought against Dax. "Enough with this game, Dax. Kill her and finish this." The strange man drew back the lapel of his trench coat and produced an ornate sacrificial dagger. The handle was made of onyx, and the gold carvings of which glimmered under the faint moonlight that trickled in through the stained glass windows. Brianna screamed, even louder, hoping someone would hear and rush in to save her. She clenched her fist and landed a frenzied punch to Dax's face, knocking him back. Brianna breathlessly scrambled and sprinted for the doors. The stranger intercepted the terrified woman. He snatched up Brianna's arm and stood strong against her struggling. "Brianna, we need to cut out your heart while it's still beating. Try not to panic so much so that you end up having a heart attack." Brianna screamed as the man brandished the blade.
"Let her go!"
Dax yelled after regaining his balance. A quiet whistle sliced through the air. Brianna jumped as an arrow burst through her captor's shoulder, stopping short of the redhead's cheek. The man's face held no emotion as he glanced down at the arrowhead. Dax tackled the unnamed man and successfully pulled Brianna from his grip. The tattooist and waitress toppled over one another before Dax resumed his earlier efforts of helping Brianna to her feet. "Brianna, quickly!" Another woman's voice reverberated against the church walls. Brianna and Dax scanned the dark shadows. A woman, dressed all in black, was crouched by a nearby pillar. The pulled-up hoodie gave way to a determined brow and stern, jade eyes. The woman readied another bolt to her crossbow and aimed at the wounded man. "No, she is ours!" the man yelled. Something in Dax stirred. Growling and teeth clenched, he catapulted Brianna forward, turned back, and threw his fist as hard as he could into the man behind. Brianna raced over to the hooded woman, deeming her a safer bet than that of the knife-wielding maniac on the altar. The archer fired another bolt at her target, and it landed with a crunch into his sternum. Instead of reloading and firing another, she snatched up Brianna's hand and dragged the waitress with her along the back wall. Feet echoed across the marble tiles as the pair ploughed ahead towards the side door. Spying the green, illuminated fire exit sign ahead, Brianna snagged at the fingerless gloved hand of her rescuer.
"We can't leave him!"
The waitress craned her neck over her shoulder and watched as Dax struggled against the death-like grip of the man in the trench coat. Blood now poured from the tattooist's nose and busted lip, and he gasped in pain as his opponent kneed his side. the hooded woman pushed open the door. Brianna desperately yanked at her shoulder, and reluctantly the archer glanced at the two men fighting beyond the church pews. "Trust me, he is beyond saving, Brianna." Brianna tried to formulate an argument, a reason, something to persuade the other woman that Dax was worth saving. He had tried to help her. Why couldn't they help him? Then her brain sent a chilling thought to halt her words. Second-guessing was one of her greatest hindrances. Or allies. She was never sure until after the moment of reasoning had passed. Brianna realized she didn't even know him. She had no idea how she wound up in that church to begin with, let alone whether or not Dax was really going to save her or kill her. Unable to fight the fleeing instinct further, Brianna surrendered and followed the woman out of the violent confines of St. Dymphna's. The young tattooist held on and threw punches non-stop. Each one became lighter and weaker until his arms became heavy and he finally wore himself into a lull. The unnamed man had entertained Dax's persistence long enough. With no more than a swing of his forearm, he sent Dax hurtling some 7 or 8 feet through the air. Dax, exhausted from the fight, couldn't even yell out in pain as his body crashed into one of the mahogany benches, completely snapping the hard wood in two. He accepted defeat, accepted whatever heinous death he was going to be met with. His whole body ached and burned, but Dax clambered away from the crash site and fell to his knees. He clutched his side through his sweat-soaked t-shirt. There was a high probability he had broken 1 or 2 ribs in the collision. Dax spat out the dribbling blood that fell over his top lip and met his enemy's eyes. The man in the trench coat grimaced in turn as he yanked the 2 bolts from his body before nonchalantly throwing them aside. He crossed the church floor in a couple of strides, his free hand wrapped around Dax's throat.
"What are you?"
Dax asked. "Oh, my boy, you should already know."
"Satan?"
With his ribs already agonizingly tight, Dax inhaled sharply when the man erupted into raucous laughter. He released his weary opponent and paced across the floor, playing with the dagger in his hands before replacing it in his coat. Still in the thralls of hysterics, the man shoved Dax, forcing him to sit down on one of the intact benches. "Oh, Dax, you give me far too much credit. I am Asmodai. Asmodeus." He bowed. Dax wasn't sure whether or not he should clap, but before he could ask, the production was short-lived and Asmodeus straightened his posture. His steely yellow eyes fixed on the dishevelled tattooist. "It's time you learned your place." Brianna clumsily followed the hooded woman through a gritty alleyway that tapered onto an empty back street. Their destination became clearer as they approached a waiting car. The beige body almost merged with the warm fog. The engine purred, and the red brake lights glowed against the night's haze and the smoke of the exhaust pipe. The passenger's door clicked and flew open to reveal a burly, bald man in the driver's seat.
"Cara! Thank the elders, I was about to come looking for you."
Friend or foe? Brianna thought. The hooded woman, Cara, opened the adjoining door to the back seat for Brianna and wasted no time in climbing in next to the driver.
"Brianna, get in."
How did she know her name? Brianna all but fell into the back seat, lightly bumping her head on the way in. As soon as the doors were closed, the car hurtled out of the parking space and onto the main road. The car whizzed along the vacant roads. The time of night and the weather were keeping people from travelling. Cara lowered her hood to reveal short, dark hair, and she threw her unloaded crossbow on the back seat beside Brianna. "Do you think he'll follow?" the driver asked. "We should only anticipate it," Kara replied. "What the hell is going on?" Brianna pulled against both chairs in front. "Deft choice of words," the driver offered in jest. "None of this makes sense. I mean, that guy was gonna kill me, right?" Brianna exhaled through her stammer. "This is neither the time nor place," Kara said. "That wasn't good enough." "No! This is the perfect time. Who are you people? You're definitely not cops, I know that much." Kara inhaled deeply before turning in her seat. She pointed in turn at the driver, then to herself. "Aiden, Kara, we're here to help you. That is all you need to know." "Bullshit. Brianna, sit back and shut up." Aiden jumped at his comrade's raised voice. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter and tried his best to focus through the fog. His eyes darted between the rear view and side mirrors. "No!" Aiden rolled his eyes and silently wished Brianna had conceded. One authoritative woman was enough to contend with. "Do you not think I have the right to know why there's some crazy guy out there who wants me dead?" "When we have reached safety, then we will tell you. For now, I need you to trust us." That was quite tame for Kara, Aiden mused. "Trust you? Are you kidding me? If you want to live, yes, you must trust us," Kara growled back. Brianna laughed in disbelief and shook her head. What else could she do? She sat back roughly in her seat and folded her arms like a scolded child. A moment later, Brianna was jolted forward. She pushed against Kara's seat to save her face from pummeling the headrest. The speeding car came to a screeching halt and all three passengers stared at the road in front. Brianna hunched forward and squinted through the windshield. Is that a kid?" Indeed, there blocking their path appeared to be a young boy. Or at least he looked like a boy. His head hung lowly, making it hard to trace any discernible features. He was certainly the same height as a small child, but one thing was particularly odd about him. He was dressed in Victorian clothes. Brianna gulped as she came to her own realization. He must be a ghost. "Great! First dead priest and crazy guy, and now ghost boy." Humor was Brianna's last line of defense. She wondered if she hadn't, in fact, died back at that church. "That's no child." Kara's brow furrowed and her hand wrapped around the door handle. His head lifted as the woman opened the car door. The headlights reflected a yellowish hue to the boy's eyes. His skin wasn't plump or fleshy in tone, but rather darkened and withered. His cheeks sallow and the skin wrinkled to accommodate a fiendish grin. "Take her to Ailey's," Kara spoke. Her gaze never left the boy. Aiden nodded. Before Brianna could protest, Kara had swiftly closed the car door. Aiden shifted the gear stick into reverse and his foot met furiously with the accelerator. The engine revved, the tires squealed, however the car remained in place. Kara rounded the hood of the car and squared off with the boy. Again and again Aiden tried to back the car away, but it was locked under an invisible vice. Held in place by the sheer wish of the strange youth. The boy laughed at the display, but laced in with his innocent chuckle there came a low, distorted voice that echoed. When the boy finally spoke, his mouth moved, but the sound followed after like that of a ventriloquist puppet. "Foolish woman, she is ours." "Let them go," Kara said. She held up her left hand and flexed her fingers. The heaviness that surrounded the car lifted, and Aidan was finally able to reverse. "Wait!" Brianna shouted. Aidan skillfully spun the steering wheel, flipping the car around 180 degrees and sped off into the fog. Kara lowered her hand, and the boy's two-tone laughter filled the air again. He began to circle Kara in a predatory, stalking manner. Every now and then his phlegmy mouth morphed and snapped like a crocodile.
"Taking her from this world will not hinder his plans. You cannot stop the inevitable. You know this."
"I'm starting to remember why it is I hate you, Jinn, so much." Kara calmly reached behind her back. "You do an awful lot of talking." Her hand retrieved a knife.
"And not enough fighting."
The boy's features withered completely to reveal blackened and rotten flesh.
The Jinn barked in pig Latin.
"In order to bathe in my blood,
you will have to kill me first,"
Kara said. Aidan sped away from the city, driving further into the fog. It only seemed to grow in density. It was as though someone had blanketed the car with a dusty cloth and blocked out all of the windows. The road couldn't be seen past an inch from the tires. Brianna could all but hope Aidan wouldn't crash into something. She could hear the grumbling of thunder over the roar of the engine and peeling tires, but much like the fog outside, a haze spilled over her eyes. Her head lolled as her vision grew unfocused and her mind spun dizzily. She could hardly make out Aidan's eyes as they watched her in the rearview mirror.
"Better you sleep. It's going to be a long journey."
Aidan's voice became muffled and seemed to fall away. That entire night had finally caught up with Brianna, and she knew she couldn't fight the onslaught of exhaustion that washed over her. Her body swayed with the jostling of the car before she finally collapsed in her seat. She saw flashes behind her eyelids. Lightning? Each sparking bolt accompanied the roll of thunder that came from the clouds above.